And so go and look at the Gaza model, because honestly, that's exactly what is going to be rolled out in every single country eventually. The general population are going to be reduced down to labor, effectively, to maintain the privileges, the power, and the status of the ruling elite. And in the middle class, there'll be this battle, what's left of it. There'll be a battle between those that don't want to go down to the labor camps and who want to enter the elite circles.
Like when you come up from when you discuss the technocracy angle of this, it's obvious what they're projecting of, a kind of a digital control structure where, you can be turned off, you can be boxed out of society. And the idea is a social credit dynamic where you can be, just boxed out. So your opinions don't matter. Your influence doesn't matter. And I think at a time when people are now questioning authority more than ever, it obviously behooves the authority to create a system where they don't really need to care what you think. Look at the Palantir surveillance that is over, everything in this country, from the Gotham and the police cars, that's a Palantir program, to Elite they just rolled out from immigration, all of which is being used to map and surveil everybody in this country from multiple points. You've got Israel involved with that. You've got the AI partnership, so they have access to everything they have of the government. All this is easily verifiable.
This is a war on humanity. It's a concerted war on humanity, and it's a concerted war to drain us of our compassion towards humanity.
And we'll go from there. Okay. Good day, everyone. We are here today again with Sister Vanessa Beeley, but also with a very new special guest, Ryan Christian of the Last American Vagabond. I can advise everyone who doesn't know this channel to visit it. I actually know you much longer, Ryan, from back in the day when I sometimes came across your channel, but somehow I think I wasn't ready for it yet. So I was just thinking, okay, this stuff is a bit too deep. I'm ignoring it. And I went back to my old anti-imperialist nation state channels and these kind of things. But I have to apologize to you, Ryan, because I recently again came across your channel. You have very, very good long form videos with sources. You always use sources where you discuss the kind of transition of our society towards a kind of tech, you can almost say tech tyranny. And you do a very deep analysis. And I realized, hey, that's that guy from back in the day. And suddenly it just clicked. And I was like, this stuff is really, really good. It's deep, it's serious, it's often not ideological. It's more focused on truth and on justice, which I really like about your stuff, also on your website. And before I rant on too long, Ryan, maybe you can give us a bit of a short introduction, who you are. People know Vanessa already on our channel, who you are, what you focus on, and the things that you find very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the invitation. It's funny. I when I first started the I guess the show really, which was a further extension than just starting the website, which was a longer transition. I really tried to focus on, shorter content, funny enough, which is even how the intro still discusses it, but trying to be like the bridge between the average conversation and like the deeper stuff. And I clearly have gone further into the deeper stuff, as you're pointing out. Just funny how the transition goes. But what I think what I have the Last American Vagabond has become is just it's really it's a large thing to bite off, but really just I kind of look at it as anything that I see that's being misrepresented in the conversation, which obviously tends to why the shows can be so long, because it seems to be almost everything that we're looking at today. But it has become, it started with cannabis law reform, really. That's kind of what opened my mind to a lot of things and how much that interconnects with most conversations, just the corruption, the misrepresentation, and has now become something where, we're just trying to tackle the bigger, major issues that we're seeing of government malpractice, or rather malfeasance, and foreign policy, with writers like Derek Bros, Whitney Webb, a lot of different stuff coming that way. And, and I think what we're trying to highlight more than anything right now, from my perspective, is what we see, as you highlighted, this massive transition. What I really think as the Republican version of the Great Reset, or as I see it, really just the government using the left-right paradigm to drive us into this position. But right now, that's what I'm trying to hope people can recognize, is this is all about trying to, reimagine the society we live in.
Right, right. Thank you for that introduction. And would you explain to us and also our audience, what do you mean by the Great Reset? What is that exactly?
Well, I mean, the specific example is the book written, Klaus Schwab and the ideological kind of mindset, rather agenda around the resetting society, right? And of course, they used the COVID-19 conversation, even though it had been circling around this. Castanos and Fitz often points out the going direct reset, which was a financial version of this right before that really kicked off. And it really is a longer agenda of, you could argue never let a good crisis go to waste, using something that's happening in front of us to kind of drive that agenda. Or you could argue, which many do, and I argue there's a lot to point there, of creating crises to drive us to that position, whether COVID-19 or anything else. And ultimately, however you look at that, the Great Reset was an agenda about using that momentum, or however you look at that, to drive us into the way they wanted society to be. Of course, under the guise that was for everybody's interest, it's for, the betterment of society, for equitable outcomes. But when you really dive into it, even if that's the way that ends up, it comes at a dramatic lack of privacy, loss of freedom. And that is always how this kind of ends up. And so my mind is that that's something, that's a verifiable reality, right? That's what they projected. That's what they were laying out. The nefarious elements people can debate about. Now I see the Republican side of it. Which at that point, you had all these conservatives up in arms, rightly so, going, this is a problem. This is, we're fighting this. And now you have the Republican Party in effect, in material sense, rolling out the exact same agenda with the different window dressing, different narratives, there's some slightly different outcomes. And I think in a way, an adjustment to what we were pushing back on. But at the end of the day, it really, is my mind, is the same agenda. Donald Trump and his team at the World Economic Forum in Davos, yes, they shout some token things out. Globalism is dead, and then outline the globalist agenda that they're rolling out. It's with Gaza and the presentation of what appears to be a new global UN dynamic that Trump is creating, but he's not a globalist. It's all kind of a bait and switch. And so what I see is that being this extension of it today.
Right. I don't know if you have any comments yet, Vanessa.
No, not really. I mean, other than I totally agree. As I said, Ryan always has such a good way of bringing it all together. And I think, the latest Davos theatrics are a perfect example. Everyone was getting, and I think this is another important point. Every now and then, what they're doing is dropping in what appears to be a positive. Whether it's Zoran Mamdani, whether it's Mark Carney's speech at Davos, which I had like 100 people send me the speech, and I'm like, please stop. This guy was effectively the governor of the Bank of England when they stole Venezuelan money, right? And the fact is that, Ryan a bit earlier mentioned the technate, this idea of Greenland, Canada, Venezuela, I think French Guiana and Guyana coming under the control of the United States as a conglomeration of their power, right? And also, of course, to threaten Russia, and we can get onto that in a bit also, because I think it's very interesting, that whole juxtaposition between Russia and America right now. And, the thing is that people fall for these little kind of bits of hopium that are dropped into the sea of insanity, or the idea that there's a rift between Netanyahu and Trump, or between the EU and Trump. There is potential for some of that to be real, but to the extent that it's being portrayed to be, no, I don't think so. I think ultimately they're all heading in the same direction, and the nation state, as we talked about before, Karim, is not what we should now be looking at, really. We should be looking at the transnational setting up of whatever the new world order is going to be. And what we're seeing now is a kind of interplay of governments, of the technocracy, of the corporatocracy, to take full control of the corridors, the sea routes, the resources, particularly water. And we can get into that with what Israel is doing in the region also. So I think it's kind of, I do have to say, and I don't know whether Ryan agrees, but I'm seeing more people now commenting in this way on social media, whether it's X, I don't go on much else, even on Telegram, they're starting to get it. I'm actually seeing them pushing back against kind of nation state narratives or even against the constructs like Zoran Mamdani or Mark Carney's speech and so on. People are less susceptible to the manipulation. That's my impression from kind of, spending a fair amount of time on social media or even on YouTube, for example, and seeing the comments section on some videos that are being put out that are pushing certain narratives, whether it's regime change in Iran or supporting Israel and Gaza, whatever. I'm seeing a lot of people going, no, we're not putting up with this anymore.
Yeah, yeah. How do you see that, Ryan? Because if there's something I notice about many of your shows, which by the way, that sentiment, I share that with you. I often see a kind of frustration when I see you speak about how people react online, and you're like, don't you see it? How you're manipulated, And I share that frustration. How do you see that? Do you see a change among people, or not?
Very much so. And, I've been talking about this kind of growing awareness, during COVID-19, well before, like many different agendas, I think have inadvertently, I think so, maybe by design, but how have shaken people out of kind of this like, blind two-party stupor. There's a lot of other agendas, but I think the two-party illusion is really a crux of this kind of control matrix. But I think that we've been watching this gradual awareness for quite a long time. And right now it's just coming full. You can look at the specifics. You could look at the conservative movement, Trump's administration, the Epstein conversation. They're drowning in their dishonesty. And it's not just my opinion. There's people that are still grappling with that, that are trying to hide from it. They don't want to see it, or it's Democrat lies or Republican hoaxes, whatever it is. But it is clear from an objective perspective that most people are calling out classically held, like the two-party illusion, the idea that authority should even exist, maybe even whether we should be voting in this system, like major things I'm seeing come up. But to Vanessa's point, in the immediacy of it, there are people that are questioning these lies. And I think it's part of why this is all happening. It's a transition into a position, like when you come up when you discuss the technocracy angle of this, it's obvious what they're projecting of, a kind of a digital control structure where, you can be turned off, you can be boxed out of society. And the idea is a social credit dynamic where you can be, just boxed out. So your opinions don't matter. Your influence doesn't matter. And I think at a time when people are now questioning authority more than ever, it obviously behooves the authority to create a system where they don't really need to care what you think. So I think I definitely agree with what you're saying. And I think that that's something that is, I think why this has been rushed in a lot of ways as well. Well, my last thing I will say to what you said is I do get frustrated a lot because I fall into the trap of the conversation like we all do sometimes, where I'm on Twitter and I'm like, I can't believe nobody sees it. Then I go, oh, wait, I do think everyone sees it. But it's like you react to those things. And it's worth pointing that out, though, because that social media part of it is a huge part of how they want to draw you into what's happening,
Right, exactly. And I find it very important also what you just said, Vanessa, on that we are slowly going away from this idea, at least in our corner, from this idea of a kind of battle between nation states when it comes to the world that we live in, and that we should focus more on a kind of that hyper elite, you could say, those technocrats that are transcending nation states and borders. And that also reminds me of what you just said about Russia, Vanessa. I just recently saw that Russia is committing to what is it, 1 billion to Trump's peace plan in Gaza. I call it pedo plan, but you know what I mean. And then he was talking to Abbas. Abbas is of course hated by most of the Palestinians. So you actually see a kind of convergence of different fields of different areas of the web. We slowly go towards discussing these powerful elites that have a tremendous control over our societies. I recently saw a very well-known PC channel also talking about Palantir and how that is taking over the whole digital market. And that brings me a bit to what I invited you for, Ryan, and that is, you said there is a kind of transition of society. And I think slowly people are realizing it. We become part of this kind of almost digital, or at least they're trying to create digital fiefdoms. You often talk about freedom cities, You also relate that to, for example, what's happening in Greenland and all these powerful people behind Trump. Can you maybe explain to us a bit more about those freedom cities? And you also talked about tech Zionism that is related to that. I think that would be very interesting for our audience.
Yeah, I mean, it's what I framed it as a techno-feudal state. I mean, and this is what it seems is even. I mean, short of like saying that exactly, what they're framing in their own literature about this. You know, the reference goes to now I'm blanking on his name, Srinivasan, the former CTO of Coinbase. He's the one that wrote this book and is kind of, you know, a major part of this, you know, discussing how he sees this. And weirdly enough, I was just reading about how this goes back to even before this point, discussing doing this in San Francisco. So there's like this evolving agenda, but what he calls tech Zionism, which I think is just wildly problematic with what we see Zionism doing in the world today, and obvious other conversations we could have. But really, even if you take it the way they want you to perceive Zionism, it still basically means taking territory from something else and repurposing it for your agenda. But you know what? When you to go to the larger view about what this transition is, right? Like I said before, it's my opinion that this is a reaction to you know, the elitists. I don't think they're elite. I think they're elitist, but at the same point, of these people in these inner circles recognizing diminishing influence in the average conversation. You could even go back further in history and argue that this transition away from the feudal state mindset was basically a way to convince us that we were in control when we still weren't. You know, I think that's kind of what this is now, is to transition to the new system to make us think we picked this when it's even less influence. But at the end of the day, it comes down to this network state agenda, right? And this overlaps with, this is what I really wanted people to see early on in Trump's administration, that the Freedom City agenda is the same conversation. Seasteading, Freedom Cities, Praxeas, Greenland, Prospera, it's all the same thing. Almost every part of it tied back to Promonos Capital, which is Mark Andreessen, Peter Thiel, all, you know, kind of driven. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No,
I thought somebody said. Oh, no worries. And it all comes back
Sorry.
to this kind of, you know, philosophical driving mindset from the Curtis Yarvin kind of, you know, many books they've written. There's so much we can get into. That's just what they say is terrifying to me. But then the point is that this is about transitioning into, like Vanessa was discussing, kind of away from the current reality of the way our government structure works. And the main point is everything I'm seeing today is just because I think most people are unhappy with that. Most Americans, most people in the world are tired of the way that governments have been abusing everybody. And so they find a way to convince us this is the solution to that. Sort of like saying we're going to end the Fed, but here's a CBDC. It's like this, everything like that is happening right now. And so they're driving us into this position where they're creating, you know, a CEO run, tech run, you know, Freedom City, you know, whatever. And this is what Trump was discussing. That's also promoted. And if it was to happen, the funding was coming from the same people involved with Prospera. Freedom Cities, Inc., or whatever the company was called, that is backed by the same people that's driving Prospera. That's Peter Thiel. That's Mark Andreessen. That's the same conversation. So what I see is these people either with Trump's administration or all of the U.S. government's involvement, or just of their own volition through lobbying, which kind of ends up being the same point. They're trying to reimagine the way our society operates. Mark Andreessen and Joe Rogan discussed literally this mindset, like trying to convince us that no, the old ideas of democracy have never worked. And I'm of the mind, by the way, that democracy's mob rule, constitutional republic is what should be discussing, or just no government really. But the point is that they're saying that your system doesn't work. What you need is the good oligarchs. That's what he actually discussed. Come to save you from the bad oligarchs. So it's like they're really showing you this transition of power, and it very well could be an illusion of the same people, or you could argue this is a different group of elitists trying to take power from another group of elitists. But none of them, in my mind, have the interest of the people at heart. And if you really dive in, last point on this, of the network state mindset of what they write, even like aside from the kind of token libertarian mindset things they throw over the top, in material, like in practice, what they're doing is the opposite. And you can see this, and I think it goes to a point of the Great Reset mindset of you'll own nothing and be happy, despite the way they frame it. When it comes to the digital mindset, you know, you own the keys to all of your assets, but who controls those keys? This is the way they're framing this. It's like having something in Coinbase where they can go, yeah, you can access it, but we can decide to cut you off the moment we don't like what you're saying out loud, which is happening. So it's a transition. It's an illusion of control.
Vanessa, you wanted to say something?
No, I think absolutely correct. It's an illusion of control. And I also connect into the statements being made by representatives of Trump, like Tom Barrack, who are saying, you know, we've had enough of the old way that we used to do colonization, where we used to put boots on the ground and blah, 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 and foment unrest and bring about regime change. But hold on, they're still doing that. Right? Like, what did they just do in Venezuela? So I think Ryan made a really good point there, where he's saying, you know, it's good oligarchs versus bad oligarchs, and that's very much how the narratives are being manipulated now. It's kind of still that we're in that good cop, bad cop paradigm, right? Where Barrack comes in and goes, well, you know, I have Lebanese roots. We don't want to destabilize Lebanon. We want an integrated, unified Lebanon. No, he doesn't. He wants a Lebanon that's under the control of the IMF and the Saudis, and where Israel has free reign to take the territory it wants, to invade as far as Beirut, and where effectively they push forward with whatever the new iteration of the Greater Israel plan is. Right. So whatever, however they're describing this, and when you're talking about freedom cities, I urge everyone to watch Jared Kushner's presentation on the Gaza plan, which I've been saying for nearly 2 years now, or even longer, that Gaza is the model for the future of all humanity. So what you're seeing Jared Kushner roll out in Gaza, so you've got the so-called free zone trade areas, and then he actually described them. He didn't quite call them labor camps, or did he? I can't quite remember whether he used that terminology or not. But effectively, that's what they are, right? And then there was going to be a Hamas area where they can corral and imprison, effectively keep in a concentration camp anyone that retains any kind of resistance against the Zionist regime takeover of their territory. And of course, that's in conjunction with the billionaire complex in the United States and in the entire Zionist bloc, consisting of the Gulf states and any countries that have or are on the point of normalizing with Israel. And so go and look at the Gaza model, because honestly, that's exactly what is going to be rolled out in every single country eventually. The general population are going to be reduced down to labor, effectively, to maintain the privileges, the power, and the status of the ruling elite. And in the middle class, there'll be this battle, what's left of it. There'll be a battle between those that don't want to go down to the labor camps and who want to enter the elite circles. I mean, it's literally George Orwell Animal Farm stuff rolling out. But the Gaza model is incredibly important for people to actually understand what is incoming in our culture and society.
Yeah, it reminds me of some of the words Alon Mizrahi said. He said that our society is so sick, you only have two choices. That is either be abused or become one of the abusers. And that's it. And that's exactly what you just said. And I totally agree. And it's not only we're going to be labor slaves or we're going to be sex slaves. I always say that because let's be honest, somehow all these billionaires are, or at least the overwhelming majority, are part of the Epstein class. There's something deeply depraved about these people. And I wrote about this as well on my Substack. Guys, realize that now with this whole Trump peace plan, you have all these sick billionaires are running a society with at least 40,000 orphans. You know, I said this is the wet dream for these depraved types. And like you said, that's what they want for the rest of the world, where we just become their slaves and they control everything. And Alex Karp recently said, you have to control everybody at every movement, even on the toilet or something like that. It was like this doesn't surprise me at all. You know what I mean? And I think, and I don't know if you agree with that, Ryan. I think with what we are seeing now with the whole ICE situation in the United States, that's the first step towards the Gaza model in the rest of the world. How do you see that?
Yeah, I agree entirely, and I want to kind of interconnect with all this. You know, the Zionist influence on what we're discussing. Peter Thiel and PayPal mafia and everything else in Trump's administration, as well as the Epstein connections to all of that. Both what you said, the same kind of idea, all this together, the idea that what we're seeing, some people might be quick to resist the idea that this represents the same thing. That seems too crazy. That would never happen here. It's the same kind of stuff you get every time. But for those that may not just want to see that larger, just acknowledge the severity of what's actually happening of ICE and the transition, the national police element, the way that this doesn't seem to ever be going away. Like this is a long-term plan. And so I agree with that. I think this is a whether it's that designed for the United States or just the obvious transition, because we are watching this just since the beginning of this administration. But obviously it's not unique to just Trump, but he is unprecedented in his own ways. But since just this 2025 forward point, look at what has transitioned. Look at how much has changed. Police wearing masks all the time. I mean, we are watching a rapid decline into a, authoritarian state. I think we've always kind of been in that position. But so I agree that this is a beginning point of that. But when you look at, like you said, the point of, who's driving this? Look at the Palantir surveillance that is over, everything in this country, from the Gotham and the police cars, that's a Palantir program, to Elite they just rolled out from immigration, all of which is being used to map and surveil everybody in this country from multiple points. You've got Israel involved with that. You've got the AI partnership, so they have access to everything they have of the government. All this is easily verifiable, and so it's not incorrect or irrelevant to point out what you just said. All these people, and everyone can do their own due diligence on what billionaires you think are connected to the networks, but let's realize that most of these people are tied in to things like the Epstein network or funding foreign policy adventurism or things that show you that they have no interest in freedom and liberty and self-determination. And the Zionism part of it, I don't even think we need to actually discuss this for most people in the world. I think it's self-evident what Zionism is and has been and what it's doing right now in Gaza. And if you can't recognize how alarming it is that they have a central driving force in all of this, on the surface, Palantir has a strategic partnership that they started with them in 2024 for using their Habsora lavender programs to kill people in Gaza. And they're the ones controlling how this goes. They're the ones building out the Gaza system, the technocratic government, as they call it, with digital IDs and digital money. Where are all the conservatives who said that this was everything we were fighting, who are now cheering on? It's just so confounding that this is so obvious and continuous. But I want people to see how that interconnection between all these horrible things is just self-evident. And that's why I brought up the logo Trump created for the so-called Board of Peace with people like Netanyahu and Tony Blair. It's a slap in our face, but it is clearly it's just insane, right? But it's basically a UN logo. It's the same design with just a little bit closer focus on the North American element, which, by the way, is the Technate. That's what they show in that map. And so what's crazy is that they're literally building this UN adjacent element, and that's not globalism. It's like that. Like, this is back to the same point. They're recreating all of this, and it's right in front of us.
Yeah, and actually, my point on the Board of Peace, because the huge number of countries that have actually been invited onto the Board of Peace, and I'll come back to Putin in a minute. But if you actually look at the countries that are not invited, that gives you a very clear picture of who is having the war waged against them right now. And of course, it's Iran, Lebanon, Syria. Of course, that's a little bit more complex since the fall of Damascus in 2024 and the takeover by the Western manufactured tech theory government. But Iraq is not on there. Of course, Venezuela is not on there, Cuba, Yemen, Colombia. So every single country that is still maintaining some degree of freedom or disconnection from the technate, from the incoming technocracy and the Zionist hand behind most of it, right? Putin, as you mentioned, has this is another how this plays out very often. So he put out this statement saying that he would give £1 billion of the money that was taken from him, that of course he's pursuing the EU to give back to him. But I think there's something like 5 billion apparently banked in the US. So he made a statement saying, okay, you can take 1 billion from our money that is banked in the US, and with that, I'll join the Board of Peace. Everyone started telling me, even what I call really switched on people were saying to me, but it's just irony. He's playing this kind of 5D chess. I'm like, oh God, please, can we stop with the 5D chess thing?
Yeah.
It's very clear from the meetings that were had in Moscow, that the trilateral meeting that I think is going on today in Abu Dhabi between Ukraine, Russia, and the United States, although just before I came on, I checked. I'm not sure whether the Ukrainian delegation turned up. But in Moscow last night, for example, it's very clear. Again, Josh Gruenbaum, who's part of Trump's advisory administration, who's on the board of the peace board, right, and as one of the chief operators in generating the plan for Gaza, is suddenly switched, and he's over in Moscow with Jared Kushner and Stephen Witkoff because basically he's going to be doing the same thing in Ukraine. So don't tell me there isn't crossover here, right? And don't tell me that Putin doesn't want to be a part of the board of peace. And just very quickly, something that my sources have been telling me for now about a year. It's not public knowledge yet, but I kind of do trust the sources that are talking to me about it. Is Putin has been basically grooming the Palestinians that are in Russia, that have been educated in Russia. He's training them militarily and as security force. They are potentially the ones that are going to be in Gaza, controlling as part of the international security force running Gaza. If that has been happening for the last 2 years, which according again to my sources it has been, that means that Putin was on board with this from the beginning. And the statement that he put out, I think it was yesterday, kind of saying, he's not going to join the board of peace unless Palestinian rights are taken into consideration, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I mean, we've talked about this, Karim, but where are the sanctions? Where is the cessation of trade with Israel? Where is the boycott of the entire Zionist bloc? Where is the statement declaring it a genocide, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Right? Why are they still pushing a two-state solution? Right. So if it's nonsense, but I do think people are starting to see through it now. Like it's clicking. Before, when I would have challenged something like that, people would have been all over me saying, well, blah, blah, blah. The Arab states don't support Gaza, so why should Russia support Gaza, etc. All the arguments that we've heard. But now it's becoming, in my opinion, very apparent what is going on. And Russia, again, is putting itself in a kind of Gorbachev situation, again, where it's actually justifying the creation of this technate, right? It literally is. Putin actually went on record saying, but I understand the historical reasons why the US wants to take over Greenland. But taking over Greenland is going to challenge Russia in the Arctic. Because Russia has dominance in the Arctic sea routes, right? Is it, this is... I don't know whether it's extreme naivety on Russia's part. I'm sorry, I don't have any consideration for any kind of 5G chess theories right now, because, Russia has proven itself time and time again to be a paper tiger. When their vessel was basically boarded by Trump, and Zaharova literally begged the US to release the Russian crew members. Today, she's bewildered that Trump hasn't followed through on his promise to release them, but there's no military backup from Russia to protect their vessels. The French have just boarded another one in the Mediterranean. What is Russia actually doing about it? Like Lavrov has actually said, I'm just going to sit back and watch what happens between America and the EU. Dude, so for me, this just demonstrates that there is a transnational ruling elite that are benefiting from all these plans, all of these maneuvers. They're going to cut a deal out of it, whether it's Kirill Dmitriev or, he's not a big player, but he's influential.
If I could add to that really
Your
quickly.
thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah, it's such an important point in the larger picture. All of this, as Vanessa's pointing out, it's something that it's coming from sources. You can decide out there for yourself whether you think this is what's happening. But it's worth considering, like the Epstein blackmail network, for example, in the U.S. That's not unique to the United States, right? There's clearly, and it, by the way, wasn't unique to Epstein. If you understand how this really was. And so it's important to consider, as she's outlining this, that network very well could be in effect, as it is, I think, in this country, over the Russian government. But it's also, you should also consider the fact that maybe they're just in line with the agenda. And what she's highlighting is a feigned action of, we want to support them, but in the background, not really doing it. Like we can see with most of these Arab countries, like we can see with any number of people out there standing up and screaming the thing about Palestine, but then not doing anything in action, So it's worth considering, like we saw with COVID-19, that there was clearly a coordination that was undeniable in a lot of different ways. And some people would argue that's just because they recognize the interest of, the global safety, whatever. I don't believe that. I think at the end of the day, you can see that this was, in my opinion, the interest in taking the mechanisms that were being presented of control that they could all utilize over their peoples. This is how I view government. And at the end of the day, though, they still had disagreements on maybe how they thought it would be rolled out or what they thought they would take from it. Or then, they still double cross each other because they're governments. And I think that's what we have to consider with what Russia's doing right now is at the very least, it's obvious that they're not really, doing what they claim they're doing. And if they're now supporting this, and I love your point about the 5D chess thing, it's what Trump does all the time. You come out and act like he's just trolling you all. Well, what's the difference when the money still went there? When he still supports it? It's narrative control. Yeah. And so it's worth considering all that because I think that there's more at play here.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just thinking about before we started this show, I saw this interview on the Gray Zone with an Iranian woman. With Max Blumenthal was interviewing an Iranian woman who experienced the protests in Iran. And like you always say, Ryan and Vanessa, you as well, and that is why I like both of your work is, and I do that myself also in my academic work, is how you connect all these dots, that all these things are related. That is so important to understand. Instead of seeing all these problems as isolated issues around the world, no, all these horrible things are pretty much related. And it's the same with these protests in Iran. And you saw this lady, she said, we had such a normal society. You just you go out, you work, you shop, etc., and suddenly everything descended in the darkest chaos she's ever seen. And when you hear her speak, you can feel how genuine it is. She's like, we always saw that on television. We thought, that's in Syria and these countries that are being influenced by US imperialism. But suddenly she saw it, and she saw what it means when these countries and these elites want to interfere in your society. It's total depravity. Like people's heads were chopped off and people were burned and everything. And then you realize, I just realized we don't have trickle-down economics in our society. We have trickle-down psychopathy. Like our societies are becoming increasingly depraved and crazy because of the people that are ruling us. And it's total lawlessness, total insanity. When you see that, what they were doing, Mossad and CIA in Iran, and just innocent people. And this lady also said that she said the most of the dead bodies had open eyes like this, like they were all in shock what was happening to them. These were people who were just suddenly attacked. And yeah, I don't know. I'm diverting a bit from what we were talking about, but it is related to all the things that we talk about. Because why am I saying this? What I have noticed is, talking about that 5D chess thing, Vanessa, is I noticed that even today, and this frustrates me a lot, is people keep defending ICE, for example, for shooting a woman blank in the face. People are defending Trump's decisions. People are defending Putin. And I'm like, guys, are you not seeing what's going on here? That can happen to you. Are you sure you want to defend ICE? And they're like, she's a lesbian and this and that. Your mother and your sister can walk on the streets and you cannot smell if they're lesbian or not. It can happen to you. And it just so frustrates me that it doesn't matter what these people do. You always have a significant portion of society that seems to defend them. And my question is how to overcome that. It deeply frustrates me. Yeah.
Well, I'll say just that I think I agree with your point. And I think, kind of what we were pointing out earlier, I think it's worth always considering whether or not it's the reality that rather just the obvious point that there is a lot of manipulation, right? Like take, for example, the point of the what's it called, the false internet theory, and the facts around it are that right now the internet is 50% bots, and you can prove that, if not more. But a lot of that's just like processes, like asking for the weather and boo gives you something, right? But nonetheless, it's also a lot of people out there with fake accounts. Mossad, CIA, these are verifiable things, right? So we have to consider that even if that is the majority, that there's they're behind them shoving them off the cliff. It's like there's a huge momentum of false information driving that. But I do agree with you. And I think, because I know people in my own circle, family and otherwise, that repeat these things. And I'm going like, you're not a bad person. You're not in some network. And how are you believing this? But there are people, but I'd like to believe, in my opinion, I don't think it's the majority. I think conservative, liberal, anything, I think most people are, whether they're being quiet about it, that's another part of it. They just don't want to speak up. They don't want to be called out. They want to feel part of the team, but they feel uncomfortable about this. And I think it's coming out left and right, like literally, but also just in general sense, like coming out everywhere, But I think what's crazy about it is that anyone who actually pretends to believe or claims to believe in the Constitution can stand up and support what they're doing in a lot of different ways. I just think that's team sport politics. But again, I don't think it's the majority.
Yeah, I think when you talk about ICE, I always say, well, look at what's happening in Syria right now. When you talk about Iran, look at what's happening in Syria right now. And Syria has been under attack for 75 years, since 1946, right? Endless regime changes and CIA black ops and MI6 interference, basically until Hafez al-Assad came to power. And then they kicked off another Muslim Brotherhood revolution back in the late 70s, early 80s, which was eventually crushed in Hama. And of course, the narrative is that, the Assad regimes, this is it, they're always massacring Sunni Muslims. But hang on a minute, you've got Sunni Muslims or Takfiris under Jolani massacring Sunni Muslims, which are the Kurds, right now in the northeast, right? So it doesn't work like that. And that's the thing. All of this justification comes down to nothing. And as you said, Karim, what happened is a woman got shot 3 times in the face. And she didn't even she made contact, but it was a glancing contact with the guy who just didn't get out of the way quick enough. It's not as if she was doing 100 kilometers an hour, right? And is that enough to shoot someone 3 times in the face? Of course it isn't. And the thing is that what's now happening also, I was thinking about this morning, we're getting so flooded with narratives right now. There's a war here, there's, Venezuela, Colombia, Cuba's under threat, Iran, we're just on kind of delayed time really until I think a major aggression is started against both the Yemen and Iran. ISIS is being dispatched into Iraq to take on the resistance there. Like basically Israel's job right now, if there's a major aggression against Iran by Trump, Israel's job is to contain the resistance reaction in the rest of the axis. So what does that mean? It means Hamas, it means Hezbollah in Lebanon, it means what there is of resistance, which still remains inside Syria, in Iraq and in Yemen. So potentially it's gonna potentially be a regional war. And my point is that people are so saturated by these narratives. There's violence everywhere. You kind of forget the human aspect of it. It's too much. People are overwhelmed by it. So you forget about the kid that is getting raped in State Eman jail in Israel. You forget to focus down into the human perspective of it. And I'm really glad you mentioned that from the lady in Iran and the visual aspect of what is going on. People need to remember this is a war on humanity. It's a concerted war on humanity, and it's a concerted war to drain us of our compassion towards humanity. Because it's too much. I understand it. It's literally live streaming 24/7. And that's part of it, to actually make us immune to the child rape, the trafficking, the abuse, the beheadings, the gouging out of eyes, the absolute psychopathy, as you said, that is now being unleashed upon the planet, the whole planet, whether it's Africa or West Asia or Venezuela, Latin America. We're heading towards the Isaac Accords. That, like, it's going everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is what I meant with that trickle-down psychopathy. It's
Yeah.
these people are so incredibly unhuman, to use a bit of a weird word, but they're so depraved, and it's going so fast all of a sudden. It's you almost see society collapsing in front of your eyes. It's so depraved. It's so extreme all of a sudden. I mean, also just in Europe where I'm from, just innocent students being beaten up and taken from the streets for protesting what's happening in Palestine, and then doing how do you call that? I forgot the word that they don't
Hunger
eat.
strike.
Hunger strike.
Yeah, the hunger strike. Yeah.
That they're doing hunger strike, and that the government just lets them die, pretty much. I heard that they stopped doing it because things were getting too extreme. But it's so unbelievably depraved. I think many of us did not realize that a society can just collapse so quickly and so visible. I mean, who is even talking about Bondi Beach right now? Everything's happening. There's so much happening that people are not even thinking about it anymore. Whilst back in the day, you would speak about these things for like what, 6 months, a year? You know what I mean? So I don't know if you have anything to say, Ryan. I'm just a bit rambling on here.
No, it's very interesting to think about that. Whether Bondi Beach or any number of events that are like moments ago in the news cycle, and it's just they don't even exist right now. And I think that's a condition of the deliberately the 24-hour news cycle, just the now nonstop narrative management. So it's so things can be massaged and leaned into. Elon Musk can go 100% correct. Look over here and drive the conversation, where he captions his tweets and just drives 7 million views to whatever he wants you to look at. And, that's easy to control the flow of the conversation, But what I would point out, though, and I think it's worth considering, kind of where modern day terrorism comes from, which I think is pretty academically proven to be Zionism. And you can understand how this was really created. And that doesn't mean that there aren't other people of other religions, whatever else, that carry out similar events. But it's pretty bomb vests and the whole thing. I mean, this is where this comes from. And to understand that from a psychological, I believe we're living in, the reality of 5th generation warfare today. I think kinetic warfare, as much as Vanessa pointed out earlier, is never really going to go away. And I think it may, the powerful will always use that when they need to, but we're beyond that in a lot of ways. They don't really need to do that when you understand what they're capable of. And so when you look at all this going on, a lot of that is, borderline, some of it is whack the dog stuff, like not even really happening the way we're being shown. But I don't want to pretend that means the bad events are all hoaxes. Stuff never really, I think a lot of this stuff is what they're capable of and actually happening. But to that degree, we have to consider this. And so what you're highlighting, all these people and all these events, it's like we have to consider that the head chopping, burning people alive are not reactionary people in Iran, but Zionist agents or CIA elements, like you were highlighting. That's what you were saying. But for the average person to consider that. And so they're out there creating the worst impression of what they want you to assume is Iranian action. So then they can point to it and say, well, that's why these monsters have to be stopped. And it's the same thing they do everywhere. Every single continent they've been involved, or country they've invaded and been involved in, it's the same outcome, So it's, again, worth considering that we're being played into that position. Go ahead.
I think also, sorry, just really quickly on that, and another important point to add into what Ryan just said, that of course also feeds into the migration narrative, which right now is turning, British people against British people, effectively, citizen against citizen, because the migration issue is getting blown out of all proportion, and the elements. And this is like a very difficult one because it's a very emotive subject, to be honest. And it's not all Tommy Robinson extremism, which of course was also created by the Zionists. It's also related to a genuine nationalism and a genuine fear that these people are going to come in and do harm to the citizens of the country. Right. And there's a degree of truth to that. I know we've talked about this, Karim, where the British, let me look at Britain, where Britain has effectively been creating these terrorist extremist Muslim organizations. They're a perversion of Islam, in my opinion, from Saudi Arabia to support in Qatar of the Muslim Brotherhood, and in Egypt, of course, to the Takfiris like Jolani, who was literally groomed to take power by the British, by the MI6, predominantly in Syria. British fanatics who were fighting in Syria alongside Al-Qaeda were actually given amnesty by Sadiq Khan back in 2016. They had a year to come back to Britain. So they're open arms to the radicals that they radicalized. MI6 radicalized, the CIA radicalized, and then dispatched to fight their proxy wars, whether it was in Afghanistan or in Yemen or in Syria or even here in Lebanon, right? And in Palestine. We've seen the ISIS elements being weaponized against Hamas by the Zionists. So it's a two-tier discussion, because there are British citizens who are genuine refugees, genuine immigrants. And then you have the British regime or the US regime created Takfiri elements that are a threat, predominantly to the Muslim moderates living in the US or living in the UK. But it's you know what I mean? So I think that's an incredibly important point, because out of all of this, not only are they killing the people in the most heinous ways in the countries that they're targeting for destruction or regime change, they're then effectively being funneled back in to their own countries to create the environment for civil war. And what I find, just to finish, what I find really interesting is Kirill Dmitriev, who's now become probably the most vocal spokesperson for Putin, has been pushing this narrative. Since he came to prominence, he's been pushing the immigration, you must reject Muslim immigration, extremist immigration into your country. So for me, this is a very important knock-on effect. It's a consequence of everything that has been happening up to now, and it's going to be weaponized in the future in Europe, in the UK, and in the US.
And then you have just quickly, Ryan, and then you have these tech, what you were talking about, Ryan, then you have these tech billionaires amplifying these stories, like Elon Musk, who has his algorithm on his side and just makes you hate Muslims even more, and rile up all those tensions. And UAE, by the way, the UAE is joining in. It's disgusting. Sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
No. I just to flesh out what Vanessa was saying, what she was aiming at right there. I think it's important to focus on the one point that, what you were saying is that you're creating this situation. So then you have people that are, or that it's being created. You have people who are reacting to that in the US, the UK, all over. And in many ways are, like you said, are concerned about the, the invasion of, whatever way they frame it. There's lots of different ways they frame it of the country. And so there is a valid point to be made, like you highlighted, that is happening. But see, this is where it becomes all manipulated, is that, like she said, these are people that are being, the elements that they're manufacturing in order to do this, whether Zionism, CIA, whatever we're talking about, these are verifiable realities. I mean, religious Zionism literally talks about flooding the West with immigration. It's not that hard to recognize. And so the point is that then when they go, this is a problem, it gets framed as only racism. And a lot of times it is. A lot of times they're the ones falling for the Elon Musk manipulations and misseeing it. But so then we come in and we go, but they are racist, but wait, there is a part of it that's real. And it's, how hard that is to get the average person to come to digest, because then they think you're either on one side or the other. They don't realize that it's almost always somewhere in the middle. I just think that's really important, because that's how all this tends to work. That's the point I made about, the modern idea of terrorism coming from these elements, is they create these things and then blame it on the side they want to fight. And it becomes like this self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think that's what the immigration part is. Lastly, to the Russia point, it very well could be like you're highlighting or suggesting that they're just a part of that same agenda, but it also could just be that Russia's just going, okay, I see how this works. I'm going to use that narrative because that'll allow us to take more control of our population. And I think that is a core driving force for most governments, but probably both at the end of the day.
I think also there's probably conflict even within the Kremlin, even within the government structures in all these countries, as to what policy they genuinely want to follow. Because I am personally seeing a huge schism between, for example, Vasily Nebenzia at the UN and his statements on Palestine and on Venezuela compared to the foreign ministry statements from Lavrov and Zaharova. You know, we talked about Zaharova literally thanking the US for, after its piracy, after the foreign ministry were putting out statements saying this violates international law, blah, blah, blah. And then Zaharova comes out actually thanking them for promising to release the crew members, right? So that there appears to be greater disagreement between the various elements, whether it's military in the Kremlin. You know, Dmitriev is obviously in conflict with other members of Putin's advisory board, but he's being given prominence. So that raises questions in my mind. And if we go back to the very recent release of the archived conversations between George W. Bush and Putin from 2001 to 2005, and if you go back to 2001, which was a very private conversation in which Putin actually says he doesn't believe in terrorism, he doesn't believe in terrorist proxies. He believes it's a war between Jewish capitalism and Islamic capitalism. So if he genuinely perceived it as such in 2001, and he's very clearly allied himself with Jewish capitalism, in my opinion. If you look at his history with Israel, particularly in Syria, it's very clear that he was effectively working to secure the security of Israel just as much as he was there to secure Russian bases in Syria. And in fact, in the end, what happened? Syrian national security was secondary to Israeli national security and secondary to Russia's geopolitical strategy in the region.
Yeah, very important.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I just wanted to say that if Putin would still have that opinion today, I would be shocked about, then I would think that's a very, very, well, I won't use that word, but it's a very unintelligent conception of what is going on today. But I don't think he would still think that. At least I hope so. We're already at the hour here, but I wanted to end with one question, and I hope we can do this panel again, Vanessa and Ryan, because I think we have a very, very great circle going on here with different angles. I really, really like that. One final question, and let's see if we can make it a little bit more optimistic to end on, and that is, do you guys? And that's always what I wonder, because I'm a pessimist. I'm gonna be very honest. I'm very pessimistic. I just hope to be a little bit more optimistic, but where to go from here? And that is also something that you're trying all the time, Ryan. You try to educate people. How do we build alternatives? So actually, I have two questions in one. One is, what do you think, Ryan, and Vanessa after Ryan, what do you think we have to look out for most immediately right now? So think about digital IDs changing in the way our societies are structured. I don't know. What is it that you say, hey, guys, watch this, keep an eye out for this? And two, what should we do to build alternatives? How to get out of this stuff? Because we're going down, man. It just doesn't seem to stop right now.
Well, I would say two things from an American perspective. I think it's really important. I mean, and I'll just say for those that don't know me, you know, I have a very anarchistic perspective. And I think if you don't understand what the word anarchy means, it's not chaos. It's worth looking up and understanding. No rulers. It means no rulers, but not no rules. And it's a very important manipulation. But I come at from that perspective. And so that being said, if it were in my power, I would want a governmentless world. But since we live in this situation, so speaking to an American mindset with our current circumstance, I think what we need to focus on more than anything, and this would apply to all of you just said, digital IDs, everything, is just the core principles, the values, the idea, or just constitutional rights, and the idea of the actual principled stance around this. Not like during COVID, a lot of conservatives said, well, the Constitution doesn't say, shall not be infringed, asterisk, except with a pathogen, right? And then they failed to make that point today around the same exact circumstances. Alex Zeck said the other day really well that, being accosted on the street and being demanded to prove your citizenship or being detained is the same as being accosted on the street and demanding vaccine vaccination status and then being detained. It's the same point. And if you don't see it that way, then you're being manipulated in some way, you know? So go down to the basic, the core principles of what we believe and understand that you're being slowly manipulated to ignore those things. And that's kind of its own part of the reimagining and transition of society into a place where we just invert these meaning of these words. From a global perspective, I mean, it's kind of the same point, but I just think it's, it comes down to core liberties and freedoms and what we believe we're actually, I would argue most average people, most people in the world fight for those things. And that's why governments project that they're fighting for it. Otherwise, why would they tell us they want these things if they didn't believe we actually wanted them? And so go back to those core values and stop letting partisan or rather just political narratives convince you that one thing or other is, even though it's not in your interest, will somehow lead you to the best outcome. It's such a classic manipulation. In regard to the other systems, I will always reference Derek Brose's excellent work. He's the lead writer for The Last American Vagabond. He also runs the Conscious Resistance Network. And he's, in my opinion, like the best person to look into to understand what it means to, as he frames it, exit and build. Now, that doesn't just necessarily mean running away and living in the woods. That's certainly part of that conversation, but it's also just about trying to build parallel systems. If you're in a position where you can't do that, right? Trying to build other systems, peer-to-peer exchange, right? Without the government. And there's a lot of that happening in the world, but just try to find ways to, build something that exists within it that will allow you to circumvent the system, like a what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, people are building alternative internets right now. We're trying to build, why am I blanking on the word? Independent. Anyways, I can't believe the word basically of the internet that's open source. I forget the word I'm looking for. Anyways, the other systems. But I recommend Derek's work on that. He has an entire thing called Exit and Build that I really recommend everyone check out. And, just leaning into the more anarchistic kind of libertarian, peer-to-peer exchange kind of mindset. But I will end with the point that I think you said about positiveness. All this can be pretty heavy, and I get it. This is pretty wild stuff. But it really does stem from a place for me of positive change. Like the only reason I actually believe, as I was saying earlier, that this is being done the way it is, even with COVID-19, they felt rushed. It felt clumsy in a lot of ways. And it could just be partly incompetence. I do think that, but I think it's largely because they recognize that most people are suddenly starting to see through things they never have before. What is that if not positive? Or independent media like myself or Vanessa Beeley, despite insurmountable, incessant censorship and suppression and control, we're still reaching people. We're still breaking through even with all of that. That's a success, if nothing else, So realize that it's darker before the dawn kind of analogy. That's where I really think we are. So fight for that, because if we don't, it may very well go the other way. But we have an opening. So thank you for having us on. I really did enjoy this conversation, and I look forward to the next one.
Vanessa?
Yeah, I think for me, obviously I'm very much based in West Asia, previously Syria, now in Lebanon. So I kind of tend to look at things from the resistance perspective from this region rather than as a Westerner. So I think number one, which is the point that ties in with what Ryan said, is right now, whatever you want to call this entire complex that is waging war against humanity, is in overextension. It's in overreach. And it's in an accelerated overreach, which is a very dangerous tipping point for them. And I was having a conversation with someone here last night who's very much connected to the resistance here in Lebanon. And as they pointed out, it's an existential war against the peoples who stand ideologically against what is happening. So if you remove nationality, just as we're talking about, stop talking about nation states, remove nationality. These are people, these are human beings who understand the ideological roots of this conflict and who are refusing, despite everything that has been thrown at them. They haven't destroyed Hamas. Hamas is not disarmed. It's not going to be disarmed. The Palestinian people are never going to give up on their cause. How many millions of Palestinians are in diaspora? They're going to have to destroy all of them, right? Or absorb them somehow into the technate, into the corporatocracy somehow, which of course they've been trying to do for years through soft power, through the NGOs and so on. That's another aspect of this hybrid war. But they're not going to destroy everyone. If, as they said to me last night, if there's one person left standing in the region that can maintain the ideology, they've lost. So I don't actually see it as a war they can win if we can actually sort of move away from the sectarianism that they're trying to impose on us also. And I said this to someone who was genuinely worried about a huge mosque that was being built in a small town in the UK in the southwest. I said, go and talk to them.
Right.
Go and talk to them about your concerns. And this is my point. We as human beings should not allow ourselves to be isolated. We shouldn't allow ourselves to fall for these sectarian narratives that have effectively destroyed this region for decades. Decades. And they've manipulated it. And sadly, if you look at Syria right now, that's a perfect example of how we should not allow ourselves to be manipulated into hating one another for our view on COVID. It happened in COVID. So everything that is pushed through as policy, which is designed to divide us, don't let it divide you. Even if you disagree with someone, you can talk to that person if that person is genuine and, not, as Ryan said, so many of the people on social media are now effectively paid by the enemy to push narratives, to fight against the narratives that we're trying to introduce, etc. But so for me, the positive side, knowledge for me is not, it's not doomsday. Knowledge is empowerment. Understanding the situation is empowerment. People like you, Karim, or Ryan, myself, all of the people that are trying to actually enlighten people to a point where they're free of the manipulation and then they can find their own way forward. So for me, I never see it as kind of blackpilling people anyway. I see it as empowering people. And that's the thing. Accelerated overreach, they're in a precarious position. Unification of the resistance axis, whatever country it's in, and understanding of who the enemy is. It's one enemy for every single people on this planet that want to maintain humanity and freedom of choice, thought, speech, right? Don't allow that manipulative ideology to infect you. Just as, you fought against the COVID narratives and so on, you've got to fight against the immigration narratives. Anything that is designed to divide, don't allow it to. And reach out to each other. Create environments in which like minds can come together. That's also very important. Don't allow yourself to be isolated.
And a good way to do that is a decentralized internet, which is what I was looking for earlier.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I got that in there. Great points, Vanessa.
Yeah.
Agreed. Very good point from both of you, and a bit more optimism. 1 hour is too short for such an interesting conversation. So I'm definitely going to invite you both again to do a round two for this panel. Vanessa and Ryan, thank you very much. Our audience can find you guys on YouTube, Substack, your website as well, Ryan. So Vanessa, your YouTube is of course just Vanessa Beeley, also your Substack, right?
Yeah.
So Vanessa, like I said,
is
one of my favorite geopolitical analysts, so everybody go there. Ryan Christian, you have the Last American Vagabond, but now it's called YouTube Censors TLAV, if I'm not mistaken. Correct?
Oh, well, that's my, so we did a thing called Pirate Channels. I was censored on YouTube a long time ago, but we had 100,000 plus subscribers. And then we got censored again with about a 50,000 plus subscribing base. And I just decided I'm not going to do that anymore. So what we do is pirate streams. People send me their YouTube channels and just allow me to stream through them. And so I just type that in there to put it on there. And every so many shows, they delete the new one and I jump to another one. So I recommend people go to thelastamericanvagabond.com or our Substack, which is TLAV, TLA Vagabond at Substack. And really just the source. I think that's important because I think these platforms come and go. Hopefully the sources will stay.
Okay, great. All right, then thank you very much, and up to the next one. And for now, I'm going to say good night because it's here already past 12, past midnight. All right.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it.
See you guys.
See you next time.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Static crackles, voices rise. Truth breaks through their velvet lies. A screen of fire, a shield of steel. Bett beat medium makes you feel. No borders, no change. No silence,